And the floor is all yours.
All right. So in the SCA, my name is Lady Kathleen Red Rider, because I used to ride a horse named Red. And when I'm not in the SCA, I'm Kathleen Haak, and I do a lot of unusual things within the horse world. And as a matter of collecting that, I sometimes teach hippology, which is the study of the horse. And Hippology is really nice because it gives us a nice starting point for our conversation. It makes sure that we're all on the same page, using the same language, things like that. And it's really stuff that you should know about your horse, um, as a base. Some of it can get really complex, like how many feet are the intestines and small intestine, large intestine, and stuff like that. And some of it can get pretty in-depth. Um, but we're going to just take a quick glance over that tonight and see kind of how hippology can be applied to learning within the SCA and bringing in some non-horsey people who may be interested in the equestrian world but don't have access to a horse. Twice I've not had access to horses or had a horse that was too young or in training to show. And while I wasn't competing that year, I went out and really worked on certification and things like that. So this is a great way to become involved in the horse world if you are not able to ride or drive. And let's see. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we know the parts of our horse. And if you haven't done it in a while, even though you think you know all of them, you may have forgotten where the croup is, where the loin is. Um, sometimes we get confused about what is the cannon and what is the fetlock and the cornet, and we know it's all down there in the leg, but we kind of forget. This is from the Morgan horse. They happen to have a really nice setup. And I'm sorry, that should say morganhorse.com membership forms. Um, and they have some information that's there that is great for kids. They have a program where you kids can go through a thing called a merit program, and they do quizzes about parts of the horse and things that you do. So you wouldn't have to know, like, number 26 down is the Vermont state animal. Does anybody want to guess what the Vermont state animal might be based on the fact that it's on the Morgan horse chart? So there's some things like that. And they also have things on coat colors and horse terms and gaits and things like that that you can print off for free. They have coloring books. So if you're looking for something to have people color, it's not SCA specific, but they have a lot of different things that you can do. And then they also have draw the correct face markings, which can also be fun for adults, because some people do forget the difference between a snip and a strip and a star and a blaze. And it's not that we didn't know this stuff at one time, but we are busy doing other things, and this may not be part of our everyday language, and so we forget it. Or we may be coming into the SCA equestrian world as an adult and didn't have the opportunity to come up through FFA, 4-H, other types of horse youth organizations. And so they may not have an opportunity to learn everything in one spot. So tonight we're going to start at the muzzle and kind of work our way around the horse. When I do this with kids, I have a 30-inch model horse that is from Tangled, and it works great. You can paint it, and then it becomes a war horse in the SCA, and people get a great big kick out of it. So if you want to do something like this, don't let the fact that you can't take a horse to an event worry you. There's other options. And I have to say that I picked that horse up. I think I paid $14 for two of them. So they're definitely out there and available. So we start at the head and the muzzle and the face. And so we have a lot of options here to talk about. We can talk about teeth. Mares have between 36 and 40 teeth. Males should have more like 40. You can get into bits and all the different things with bits. If you are interested in bits, The Horse, the Wheel, and Language is a really interesting book, and it talks a lot about teeth wear that was founded by bits, and how these type of things are looked at. They studied a tremendous amount of horses. They were going through broodmare bands in the United States, as well as looking at horses that have been recovered from archaeological digs to really get a very large sample set, which typically doesn't happen when you're reading these about these things. And so if you're interested in how bit use affects teeth, this is a good starting point. It's readable, and it's fairly widely available. It was a very well selling book when it first came out. Um, you can talk about the fact that the front teeth are different than the back teeth and how horses bite, and really the movement of the jaw and how that all affects how a horse, has to be handled and all those type of things to draw in people. Um, you can find things like this horse head reconstruction kit. Sometimes, as we were talking earlier, you can find skulls. Um, Typically, they're not horribly expensive, but they do require some type of investment. If you're interested, though, there are plenty of books out there on teeth and things. And I should have brought one over with me. Oh, I have one behind me if we need it. Um, but there's really a lot of information out there. And when you get into the bits, you get into palettes and how that type of information. There are some people that really know their bits within the SCA. And there was a girl that spoke several years ago that really, really knew her stuff about palettes because her horse had an interesting palate. And so she learned a tremendous amount about it. And she taught it at one of the events in Indiana. And so, you just make sure that you know what you're talking about. And when you don't know what you're talking about anymore, you stop and just say, hey, that's not something that I've researched yet. Let me get the answer for you at another time. Um, but there is a lot within just this here slide that you can talk about and learn about your horse. If you have never had your horse's teeth done, they do need to be done regularly. This is a type of a float. If they're under the age of 5, they should be done a couple times a year, usually twice a year. If they're over the age of 5, often they're only done once a year because they do lose baby teeth. But if you can get a hold of a float or borrow one from somebody, these are really cool. You can go and do research about how they used to float horses' teeth, which is also pretty cool. And it's not something, again, that we talk about a lot, but it's definitely something that's within the SCA purview. The other thing that we can talk about when we talk about horses' heads is their taste buds. So horses can taste sweet, sour, and salty. So this is an Osage orange, and they have been around in the United States for a very long time. And they were a favorite piece of wood to the trees, are favorite to make bows out of. And so this is actually the fruit from the tree, and they used to be called horse apples. I tried feeding this one to my horses. They were not overly enthused. I will say this one was towards the end of its life. But other people that I've met say that the horses just love them and have no trouble eating them whatsoever. We tried this in my hippology class with a group of under 10 year olds, and we touched it to our tongue, and we found it to be quite citrusy. But again, it was at the end of its life, so we are going to try again in the spring, summer, and see. You can usually find them at farmers markets. Sometimes you can find them free out on baskets in front of somebody's lawn because apparently when you have them, you have a lot of them. Um, and each of these little fiber things apparently is a seed because they can have literally thousands of seeds. And they have a texture that's kind of like a brain, which makes them really cool to hang on to and touch. Um, So the kids really enjoy that. So there's a couple of different things you can talk about in this aspect. We had a taste type te test. Hold on, let me see if I can see this message here. So we did things like um, we actually did honey. Um, and so we had a lavender honey, we had regular honey, and we had clover honey. And the kids taste tested that. And then they said, okay, if you can taste the difference between this and honey, do you think your horses can taste the difference in other things? So we tried different types of apples. You can try different types of carrots. This happens to be a purple dragon's heart carrot that I grew this year. Um, the horses were like, yay, when they first got it. And then they were like, oh, I ate that. They, they were not entirely sure. I'm not sure if it was partially because of the greens were still on there. They're not used to eating carrots with the greens on. They're used to getting the little, 99-cent rounded mini carrots. The donkeys really like them though. So you can do taste testing among your own herd and do that as a project with, you know, uh, vegetables that were grown back then. The other thing you can do is there was horse bread, and we know that horse bread was a thing. Finding a recipe for it is a little bit harder. Um, and this Elizabeth Kitchen has some information on it. Uh, take it with a little bit of grain of salt. There's better, I think, better information out there, but this is where I first learned about it. I have not yet made it, but it's supposed to be very dense. And basically, when you go out and you're trying to move great distances, it's very hard to take grains with you because by the time you take enough stuff to feed a horse, of course, your all your um, ability to haul whatever you're hauling is gone because it's been taken up. The weight has been taken up by food for the horses. So they used to make bread, and they also um, used to eat it as humans too, but it would supplement their fodder. And so you can do something like that, which would be interesting to people that are into baking. I had a discussion with some people locally who were very much into making bread, and they had never heard of horse bread. So the next time we have an SCA event, I will be taking it with me. The other thing that you can get into is salt and minerals. Um, we know that salt was widely traded, and some of the minerals were too. We know that even the Vikings were hauling it. And so I was really surprised to understand how salt was mined and crafted and however you want to put it into manageable chunks. Um, I guess I saw Gandhi too young, and I always remember him saying that they people of India didn't need the British salt; they would just get it from the ocean. And I never really thought about how you mine it. But here in the United States, we also have salt flats, and the salt would be 40 or 4 foot deep, and you could just take it off in chunks. And that's out west. So there's things like that you can talk about. I know that there is a lady that is specifically researching Roman salt right at the moment within the SCA. So these are things that you can be interested in, bring in the horse element, and still, make it relevant to people that are in other parts of the SCA and talk about, the fact that horses need them too. I will say I brought in, I went to Tractor Supply and bought the white salt, the Himalayan salt, and the salt with minerals. And I didn't really think that the kids were going to want to taste test them all, and they did. Uh, very, very nicely. They all tasted in a different spot. And I was like, this has been on the shelf for a while, so it might taste a little different. But they were game to give it a try, and they had a great time taste testing it. So don't forget that people are game to try that type of stuff. So that kind of covers the mouth area. We could talk about vision, and you could try to see if it applies to do some tests and see if it affects jousting and games like things. Um, we know a lot more about horses' eyes now than we used to. If I understand it correctly, and I'm not an eye expert, humans have three cones in their eyes, and that's how we see the spectrum that we see. Horses have two. I was always taught growing up that horses didn't see color, and now we know that that's not particularly true. They respond well to blues and greens. Red looks very earthy. Um, so something like magenta becomes like a gray. Um, Blue and yellow are very separate colors. Um, if you put them next to them, but if you put separate them, but if you put them like right next to each other, they just kind of become this gray blob. Same thing with uh, orange. So just changing the colors that you have on when you go down a joust, or if you're creating gear for your horse, does that make any difference in how other horses react to your horse? Does it make a difference in how they react to the garb that you put on them? I think there's some research that could be done there if you wanted to get into that type of thing. Uh, there's definitely been some developments in eye research for horses lately, and I think that there's things you can do. Horsehair, however, is a moving up the eyes uh, to the forelock. Um, Horsehair has been around for a long time, and we have made absolutely everything from horsehair at one point in time. I think it feels like you can cord it and make it into fishing line. You can, this is horsehair woven tasseled bracelets or band from the Bronze Age. Using horsehair was very prominent, but horsehair has differences in it. So if you are, trimming your horse's mane or whatever, you will obviously feel the difference between the mane, um, even the forelock a little bit, the body hair, and the tail. There's textural differences. And so those things are things that you can talk about. You can have samples there, and people love to touch them. Um, there is also differences in the strength between white hair and other colors, white being the strongest. There's a lot of different research into this. There is often also differences in the hair from um, mares versus stallions, geldings, and it's because of the splashing of urine. So hair from a mare is considered weaker than hair from a stallion. So if you had a white stallion back in the day, you could really sell some hair. And people did. And there was a whole trade of horsehair, and there was a lot of things written about horsehair at the time. Today, they still traffic horsehair. Tremendous amount of it comes out of um, Mongolia type area. Uh, and that still happens today. But I mean, we're talking tons, literal tons of horsehair are trafficked today. So you can imagine how it was back in the day. You could, if you became poor, cut a horse's tail and sell it for money. There's also message with cutting a tail at different periods of times. Messages, if you were a messenger and you were taking um, a message between two areas that were not happy with each other, they could chop off the horse's tail to express their displeasure with the information that was given to them. And so there's some things in that about how the tail was used to communicate that you could still go into. The U.S. Forestry Services still uses some techniques, the bell, and how many um, levels are on a donkey's tail are still communicating different things about what that animal can do. So there's a lot of things in that nature that can be explored within the SCA that still gets into some really cool things with your horse, and that you do need horsehair from. And you probably want to talk to your friends because there is a tremendous amount of difference in the types of textures of hair that you get. There is also sometimes difference in textures between breeds, but it is not significant most of the time. But if you can find somebody with a Bashkir curly, that's a whole different ballgame. And then you can do the research on what actually was used with horsehair. So this is an example of the horse that I was telling you about earlier that I've used. I just got done doing a whole Viking theme for the last year and a half or so. And this pad that I have here is horsehair. So I believe that the Vikings probably would have had it be a little bit more of a matte. This happens to be curled horsehair. If you're not familiar with it, curled horsehair is hair that was boiled and then literally they curled it. And this is 100 and some year old horsehair. It came out of a carriage seat, but it would be the same as what was used in probably your great grandparents' furniture. You can also find horsehair in plaster, and there was a lot of uses for it in its day. So you can get into researching it. When I take this out in public, people find it absolutely fascinating and they want to touch it all the time. So I do have a setup so that I have a small piece of this that is available for them to touch. I don't care if they touch this, but that is right there for them to touch on the table. And then I have regular horsehair that has been taken from, when we trim manes and such, that they can feel because it's very different in texture. Some of it is age, but most of it's because it's been curled.
How did they curl it, Kathleen? I don't understand
I'm sorry.
how did they curl it?
So literally they put it, so after they boiled it, while it was still hot, they would literally wrap it around something that was round. And so it's literally curled because when you think about it, this is why I sat here because this hair here is very flat. So if you take the hair that's off your horse, it's flat. If you take your own hair and you twist it and you curl it, it has more bounce in it, right? And that is much funner to sit on than your hair that you have right now that's straight, particularly when you put it into a big wad, because even if you mat this, it's still going to want to be flat. Whereas if you curl it, it's going to be a little bit more springy and more interesting to be on. I don't think you can see it, but you can see the differences when you touch this. Some of its differences in age and things like that, but between the white, the chestnut, and the bay, which is kind of cool. So I set that out on the table. People can touch it and do different things with it. I also sometimes have it corded because we did try to do the fishing line with it. Fishing line is not that hard to make with it, but it is, we have not been successful in actually catching a fish. You can also take your horsehair lines. These have horsehair in them. This particular line, which is for Western riding, is 20, I want to say 27 feet long. I will tell you it has its own smell. But when it's very flexible, people find it interesting, just to be able to touch it and things like that. So this is things that people actually did back in the day too, because maybe they didn't curl it per se, but they did do other things to it to keep the bugs out. Because you still have to do that. It is a great example of things that you can sleep on. I think Amy at one point in time made a sleeping pad with horsehair. I think we found that it was not particularly great because it does want to compress. So that's why you have to curl it or do something to it to make it pop up. With this particular project, I also learned how to bend wood. The roasters that you have at, Sunday dinner in, they work excellent for bending wood. So you can just stick it in there, steam it for a couple hours, and then you're good. As far as being horsehair rope durable in the long run, yes. For the most part, it is. It depends, of course, what you're going to do with it. This set that I had out here earlier, that's going to, that'll last quite a long time. It'll last, 20 years or so, if depending on how you use it. It does get dirty. And so I do wash it. I literally put it in a lingerie bag and send it through the wash machine. If you're making something from pure horsehair, it's pretty durable. You have to understand the limitations of it. Like the fishing line, depending on there's a whole scientific thing about this, but it'll hold like 10 pounds, particularly corded, because it triples the strength. And as long as you don't break it, and don't do things that clearly are not going to work, it'll hold pretty well. It's the same thing with cording with plant fiber, because of the way you twist it, it can be quite strong. So as we look at things that you can do, this happens to be some plant fiber that I've corded and made Viking era snowshoes with. This gets down into the feet. You can talk about conformation of the feet, how people used to do farrier work. I think Gase at one point in time did a project on hoof picks. And so again, you don't have to have a horse to be able to demo these type of things. This particular project, they found a Viking era snowshoe in a pass in Norway once the glacier retreated in 2019. And so we recreated it. The other thing that is happening here on this table with the one that's closest to me, right next to the pink pad, is trying to make some of the shoes that they used to use for horses in Japan. And if you go over to this archive.org video, Dr. Dave Ramey is going to have a book out later this year where they have translated a very old Japanese horse medicine book. There is no surprising cures for anything, but it's really interesting to look at how they viewed a lot of things. They were very much into spirits. If your horse got sick, it was because the spirits had gotten into him and how you had to get them out and that type of thing. But he does a great job talking about it. And if you want to visit that video, I believe it's available for free. It's worth the time. You can turn it on and do your dishes, but I thought it was well worth the hour that I spent listening to him. So on him, so this is Charlie, just so you know. I have two. One's Max, this one's Charlie. Charlie also carries some fur. He has some deer antlers. He carries the salt. He also has bells on him. Bells have a really long history. The Romans used them with horses. A lot of places did. And we use bells right up into the early 1900s in the United States to tell people we were coming when we had sleighs. It was actually part of the law. So bells have a very long history. You can tell by the shape of the bell, where it's from, that type of thing. So if you're really interested in, sound, or if you have somebody that's, plays the bells in choir or that type of thing, or is interested in music, but is also kind of interested in horses, you can get into bells, you can get into horns, that type of thing. And there also are big, so this one's set up for Viking, into tin. There was a lot of flash. The Vikings definitely liked shiny things in their harness, so you can, get into that type of thing and look at it for the horse view. So yes, you can tell the gait by the pattern of the bell. And so so one time I was researching something and I went off on a tangent, which is what I'm going to end up doing here. So forgive me, but and I got into research on wolves and wolf attacks on horses and people and things like that. who knows? But anyways, I found this guy in France that did all this research, and he literally went back and because there was a bounty on wolves. And so once money's involved, you can track things. And so literally how many wolf attacks there were. So one of the reasons why you wear a bell, the same as you do now when you're out hiking or whatever, is to tell bears, wolves, whatever, that you're coming and please get out of my way. You would think that they would just recognize that as a dinner bell, but apparently not. And so you can get into the research about wolf attacks on horses, some things like that. You do have to understand that there is a little bit of wolves in sheep clothing type things because there are books that refer to wolves, and in this type of context, they mean it as coming after what they perceive as Christians. And so those are the sheep, and there's a religious overtone to that. It's not actual wolves attacking. Um, but this kind of goes into the whole thing where you see the troikas and things from Russia with the big wolves chasing them. And how many times did that actually happen? And more often than you would think. Um, Even in Michigan, in the 1800s, there are reports of people being tracked on their horses and while they're walking by wolves. Um, so yeah. So you can get into the bells, you can get into wolves. Um, there's a lot of different things you can do here with that. But this is going back to the feet. These pads are really interesting as far as what they were doing with them in Japan. And that is made with rye wheat to make the pads. They were meant to be thrown away. They don't last very long. They last a day or two. They were 2 pennies a piece, and you could just make them as you walked along. It does not work as well if you don't use rye wheat. Um, I just share that from experience because I had that problem. So you also have to clean your horse, right? And this goes back, Case had the project with the hoof picks. This is how I got started in A&S, was with this WISP project. And this is basically how cultures around the world, before we came up with mass-produced brushes, clean their horses. And there's pretty good documentation of this. Depending on where you are, you use different plant fibers. You can, but basically you twist it and kind of cord it and then bring it around, depending on the type that you're using and different things. So if you're in sand, you might be looking at this top corner, and you would literally, it's almost like a whisk that we use today, a little hand broom, kind of works like that. To these two, the other two green, really green ones are great for getting off mud. And the two brown ones are great for just everyday dirt. And those type of things, they were expected to last about 2 weeks. When they were in use, there was actually, in some cases, not all the cases, but some cases, young boys that were hired just to do this. And that was part of, there was the whole blood flow type thing. And the idea was to briskly, very briskly wisp them, and that would bring the blood flow up, and it would help with the muscles and taking the fatigue out of the muscles and that type of thing. There's a whole logic behind it, but this stayed in practice until pretty much World War II, because it was in the U.S. military. But so it's not something that happens in a vacuum. And again, anybody can take on this project. I will say that if you're going to do this, you need to have a plant fiber. If you're going to cord it or if you're going to try to do the wisps, that's at least 6 inches long. Otherwise, it just becomes frustrating. And but if you think about it, if you have something in a bucket and you want to clean it out, you just grab a handful of grass and scrub it down. Same philosophy. Shakespeare talked about having wisps in that regard. It was probably closer to the one in the corner, and you would hit your wife with it. So I'm thinking that one probably wasn't great, but we do have documentation of that type of thing. So we've got our horse clean. He's 8. I forgot to talk about water buckets. So Gesa is gonna, I think, take on a project of making a bucket for horses. And so you can also talk about the amount of water a horse needs, how they would get that when they're out campaigning or trying to travel, because that's not always the easiest thing. And you got completed water, and basically how that worked for horses. They've tried giving horses beer, and some other things, and there's research that could be done in that area, or if you want something hands-on, you can do something like Case is doing and actually carve a bowl from a stump, piece of wood. The other thing you can do from a piece of wood is make a saddle. So we go back and talk about all the things that you need to know about a saddle, parts of the saddle, that type of thing, because again, we didn't all come up knowing this stuff. We forget it. Um, some saddles are different than others, so you can have that some don't have the full double rigging, some of them do have other things. Um, Most people don't remember how to measure yourself for a saddle, but just basically sitting down in a chair with your feet on the floor, and you measure from your knee to your back of your hip, and that pretty much gets you your length of leg that you need or what size saddle you need. So you can go into this. There's the history of the saddle, how, even if you don't want to get into too much depth, how the saddle came over to the United States and went into from Spain, and how it was influenced by soldiers and then came over here. And that's how we ended up with the Western saddle, because who else had a horn? Um, and when I was reading this, and I have not found a lot of documentation, but I have heard it said, or I have read it twice now, um, that before they came up with the saddle horn, they used to tie the rope that was on the cow to the horse's tail, which I personally think would make a really, really ticked off horse. And I've not seen any pictures of this, but I can't tell if the two writers are quoting each other or if there's actual documentation. So there's room to explore there, because we certainly had cattle and we had oxen, in which are working cattle. So how were they rounding those up? And were they using horses? How does that all work? It's not something that I know anything about. But I think that there's research available there, and you can find out whether or not they were actually tying cows to a horse's tail. Um, Stirrups, on the other hand, if you have access to some stirrups, I think that this is a really great thing to take to an event, particularly if you want to try making some of these older stirrups. Um, I think that if you're into blacksmithing, I think the Spanish iron ones could be made. There's some other ones that certainly could be made that are farther back. This just happens to be the diagram that I used for um, the kids. I would like to do some research on this Indian twisted rawhide and wood and find out how far back that goes. I don't actually know, but I can certainly make that. Um, theoretically, I could make some of these other ones like the Mexican box and the Mexican California carved wood. But I have these other stirrups, which is on the other side, the other slide. And when I take them to the kids, if you get the right group of kids, it's like Cinderella. They have a great time putting their foot into them, and everybody's careful, but we can try them. We have stirrups. The wooden stirrups are from South America. I have um, my oxbow stirrups and these other different things. And the two iron ones are from early American history, and they will put their foot in it and actually think, if you let them process it and help them along, like, which one can you get in and out of fast? If you were going to come off a horse and go after a cow, which would be the fastest one? If you were going to hit somebody, and you needed to brace on your stirrups, which one would be the one you want? If you're going to stand up and shoot a bow, which stirrup would be the best stirrup for you? Um, I keep saying a lot. My apologies. But those are the type of things that the kids can think about, and adults will think about too. If you have a setup where people can put their feet into them, they respond pretty well. But you have to put them down where they, so most of the things I have in pairs. And so I'm able to keep one up on the table and one down. And so far that's been good. I worry about my wooden stirrups from South America. I got one chip in them. Other than that, everybody's been, and that person didn't mean to chip them. It was more about hauling and then it just came off. But everybody has been very good about being respectful to them, and trying to carefully put their foot in because like I have a size 10-4E shoe and that's about as wide as you go in these. So some of the guys that we have now have some big feet. They have some wide feet. And so, particularly if they're wearing boots or something, they may not fit in. And so people have been very respectful about that. I've only had one person so far have a foot small enough to put in those little metal ones, which kind of tells you how small somebody's foot was when they wore those. Those probably ladies' stirrups. Um, don't know if 100% sure, but there's some documentation on those, which I'm not going to go into today. But they're very small. And so it's another way of looking at, okay, if you were sitting side saddle, what would that mean to you? Which stirrup would you want to be able to put your foot into? So again, great way to have a conversation about the horse without having a horse there and learning about stirrups is kind of cool. So the other thing that we talk about a little bit is driving. Driving is my passion, but not everybody's into it. So I've been looking for a way to bring that to people without being responsible for bringing a carriage and horse. So we made raid boards last year. I have 5 of them. Some of them have these horses' heads on them that actually flex and move, so you can collect up a horse, or you can turn. And if you pull too hard, his head just comes around. But if you pull softly, you can actually get that curve, and you can feel what a bend might be like. And so I took that to Rum this year, and that was very well received for what it for the 2 or 3 people that were interested. I think I had 3. Um, I had a lot of people talk to me about it because I decided that this was going to be the year. I had bought these caribou antlers, reindeer antlers at the thrift store. And I knew that I had wanted a set to duplicate something like this image from the Book of Tournaments. It's at the end of the SCA period, possibly right past, but they didn't come up with this idea just all of a sudden. There's probably some type of research out there that you can do. We know that there were pageant sleighs, and they were really cool and they're very ornate. So this is what I came up with. I attached them to a full horse collar, and then set them on top of the rain board. I will say that they are hard to travel with because the whole setup can't go set up. When you get to Rum or wherever you're taking it, you have to set it up there. And that was a little time consuming, but a lot of people asked me about them. And so I felt like it was well worth the money that I put into this project, which is under $100 at the end of the day, but it was more money than I normally put into things. There are people that do a fantastic job of just chipping away every year, every time they go out with the SCA group, of quietly just being representatives for our group. And we need those people. I am not one of them. I am loud and I'm out there going, hey, hello, this is our horse project. Are you paying any attention to me? And walking through with 4-foot antlers makes an impression. So that's me. But it would be, I'm also interested in carving these at some point, but I'm not there yet. But there's some really good carvers in this area, so I'm hoping that they'll teach me. And you can get into all the different types of collars. I've done some work on that, as has the other person that's in PA, whose name I can't remember right now. She did a project where she made a stuffed collar and what I call an O collar, and then made a haro. So that type of thing.
That was
If
Flynn.
Yeah. So if you're going to do this for A&S, I will say that do be aware, unless the rules have changed again, there are two different things. There is equestrian, and then there is agriculture. So if you have pictures of the thing being on a horse, or you're doing it to an actual horse and you have documentation, that is equestrian. If you don't have pictures of it on a horse or touching a horse, then that is the other category, or you can get into the other category and make things work.
I feel like that might be a kingdom specific thing because I've never heard anything like that here.
So
Yeah, in the
maybe
Mid-Drop
I've hit
just
it in two
recently,
different states, so I'm not sure.
the Mid-Drop simplified a lot of we used to have
Yes.
60 different criteria. Now we just have criteria for like Bardic, what do you call it, presentation stuff,
Yeah.
and Nate stuff, because it was crazy. Who could keep track of it?
Yeah, and well, I was gonna say you were with me at that one event where we had some confusion about who should be judging it because of I was looking at it as a plant fiber project, and they were looking at it as an equestrian project, which, either one's great. I don't care. But just even if that's not so true, make sure that you do A&S projects because they're of interest to you and not because you think they're going to score well. Because um, because it will break your heart if you think you're going to go in and win something. It's a long process. I will say that I did take the Viking project to Val Day, and that was the most attention that I've ever gotten for a project. It was a kingdom, and it's one of the bean count type things, so it wasn't a full A&S thing. And people could see him, and they walked up and legitimately were interested in the time and effort that went into the project, even if they were not equestrian. Because usually when I teach this at RUM or wherever, like 2, 3 people show up, and that's normal. Um, Even if I teach something at an event that has equestrian people there, or we're doing an equestrian event, uh, people have horses there, they have other things going on. There may not show up for something that is horseless, or does not have a real live horse involved. However, the people that don't have a horse but are interested in horses may show up. I talked to a lot of people at that Viking festival. It's not specifically an SCA event, but the SCA was doing a demo there, and I had my table. I was teaching people how to cord, and I had the horse there with a snowshoe, and we were making bracelets. It may be Taylor Swift's era, but in the Viking era, there's no reason why we can't make friendship bracelets also. So we were making bracelets, and people were sincerely interested in him. I found that the index cards work better than an actual paper, because nobody wants to stand there and read. So the index cards work really well about telling people this is salt, and Vikings traded in it, as well as other minerals and rocks. Shiny rocks were good. I had feathers on it. They liked shiny things. Again, peacock feathers, exotic feathers of any sort were tradable. Um, the snowshoes had their own card, and people just found that really helpful. And I looked at it as like a Twitter type explanation, and that seemed to work really well. So this is kind of how I incorporate hippology in the study of the horseback. If I want to go into the collars and talk about how the angles would affect the type of collar that you should use versus what we are using. I mean, you can see on this horse, there's some funky angles going on with that shoulder. Some of that is artist interpretation, without a doubt. but some of these other photos that you can see how the slope of the shoulder is a little bit, and how that can affect the line of draft, and what you should do, what we now think you should do about that type of thing. If you want to, you can get into it. If you are a seamstress, I am not. Coke can vouch for that. I literally stapled an outfit together once. You could make this garb here. Um, those type of things. So when you get into the study of the horse, there's certainly lots of places you can go with it. I tried to keep this pretty short, and I'm almost right on time. So, do you have questions? I'd be happy to answer them. I've done things with, taking the horse's temperature, listening to the sounds of the gut, all those type of things that people find interesting. I do think that this guy here, his book is going to be out, David Ramsey, in the spring. I think they're shooting for April. They've been working on this thing for a long, long time, and I think it's going to be an awesome book. So, all right, open for discussion. Is there anything else we want to talk about? Anybody has any questions about this? I know we go through it
I
pretty
was
fast.
cleaning I'm cleaning out my craft room, and I have one of your shirts. I need to get it back to you.
You have my burgundy one, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can put that in Gold Key or wherever. I wore your outfit all weekend at the Viking Fest. And I wore my hood too, on my blue hood that you made me on Sunday because it was windy. So thank you very much for that.
Cleaning things out. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, that actor.
So Gase and I were talking earlier about where I find these weird things at. The thrift store is great. I don't believe in buying any more equipment at this point in time in my life. I own every type of harness you can possibly own. I have a whole pole barn full of uh, beautiful, beautiful equipment that, kind of like crap. Uh, and so that's one of the things with making these. I do not want anything extra. So everything is, when you do cording, that type of thing, you do not need any equipment. Most of this stuff you don't need any equipment for.
Kathleen, that was absolutely amazing. And I didn't expect to get so many suggestions for doing research on.
Yeah.
I think that was absolutely awesome. I have a question, and it's okay to say no, obviously. I would like to share this, not just for the equestrian, but really put this out for like our equestrian guild we have here in Ethelmark, on maybe inspiring other people to get into, do some projects. Are you okay if I just share this?
That's fine. I said a lot, but other than that, I'm okay. I like it to be a little bit more polished normally. To be honest, I don't remember the name of the book by David. But if you go to that site, it will tell you in I'm sorry, I just can't remember what it is. I could tell you all about the company that's making it, but I can't remember the title.
But if you remember, Kathleen, and let me know. I know Megan, she's a friend of mine. I can give it to her anytime if you guys are not connected over Facebook.
The horse history in the Middle Ages and beyond is a site that I'm on. We do some interesting things there, and then I know that particular link is on there. But he actually did that for the Equine History Collective. It's a lecture about the edition of an unpublished Japanese Hippocratic treatise. So it may be that it's not titled yet, or he didn't release the title. But the Equine History Collective is not specific to SCA period. So, but they have some really cool things there that they talk about. A lot of those people work in museums, just as a side note. You do pay for their lectures, but I think it's worth the time. It's like $5 or something. Yeah, it doesn't say the title anywhere here.
And
Sorry
just
about
out of-
that.
And those lectures are in English, not in Japanese.
Correct. It was completely in English. And I try not to share the ones that I can't understand. And although I can read some other languages, I cannot speak them. So yeah, it's Japanese horse medicine dating 1236 CE, but it does not say the actual title. He also has a wonderful Facebook page and blog, which he just somewhat randomly talks about other things, and it's very interesting. I've been waiting like 2 years for this book to come out. I'm like, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready.
You pre-ordered it already?
And it's only going to be, I think, $60 to $65, which sounds like a lot. But given the work that's gone into this, I'm not too worried about it. There's also a new book out about chariots that they
Did you freeze on us?
Yeah. she
Yeah.
froze.
I was going to make a comment that if you are at all involved in the research or academic world, $60 for a book is nothing.
As somebody who self-publishes, you don't make a lot of money until you start charging. We don't really make a lot of money.
Yeah. I hope Kathleen is coming back. I'm not sure. Maybe
Yeah, I follow David Ramsey on Facebook. He has a Facebook page that's pretty
yeah,
good.
she mentioned that. Okay, we lost her completely, so maybe she's zooming back in or not. Did anybody else had something else for today?
No,
I will go and stop the recording.